didn't tell them that I was going to say this, but have you ever heard the old Masonic joke? 3 Grand Chaplains walk into a podcast. No.
Whenever one says it, sounds like a joke. Yeah.
Just had to get that out there. Some of these voices you will be familiar as we welcome in Right Worshipful Brother Kanjin Cederman, who's appeared on the podcast before, Yatri Trivedi, who has been on our reading room, and Fah Fah. This is the first time for him. My brothers, welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast. Fah, sorry.
That's okay.
Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So what's historic about this isn't the fact that we got 3 Grand Chaplains on one podcast. That's special. But this is the first time we've had 3 Grand Chaplains for the Grand Lodge of New York that are Buddhist, Muslim, and Hindu, which is pretty special. But then you sit here and you look at the calendar and you're like, well, this is 2026. This shouldn't be so groundbreaking. This shouldn't be so extraordinary, but we're going to be talking about some of these advances and especially some of the work and what they're doing. So before we get to that and the religions and the traditions and the faith that you practice, I want to get a little bit of your personal background, what got you into your form of spirituality, but also what brought you into Freemasonry. So who wants to jump on it first?
My brothers, before we jump in, would it be okay with 3 chaplains on if we may start with bringing a little spirituality into the mix for let no man undertake any greater important undertaking without first invoking the aid of the Grand Architect, if that's okay?
Perfect. Go for it.
It'll be quick, but hopefully deep. So, in the name of the Grand Architect, the most beneficent, the most compassionate, Architect of the universe, the grand, the forgiving, Master of the day of judgment, thee we worship, and from thee we seek help. Guide us upon the path of light, not upon the path of those who go astray or incur your wrath. Amen.
So motivate.
Yeah. I wish I could start every episode with a verbal prayer. Usually I say a small silent one for myself, but no, that was really special. Thank you, Right Worshipful. All right, so who wants to jump on the personal background? What brought you into Freemasonry?
I'll go for it.
All right, Yatri, go for it, brother.
So it's really interesting. My parents had emigrated at a time where there wasn't a ton of people of my faith around, and my family had congregated outside of Philadelphia. And so every time we had religious or family events, we rented a hall, and happened to be a Masonic hall. And that was my first sort of introduction to that. So I started looking into what that was when I was younger. You hear a lot of things and you shouldn't believe them all, but not having met anybody, I couldn't ask questions. And then you fast forward to, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I was living in New York, and I had a group of friends through Reddit, the New York Reddit meetup, and just having discussions, and Masonry came up, and I was like, hey, I wish I knew more about it, but the only familiarity I have is from the halls. And someone just said, hey, well, what do you want to know? And that was sort of what got the ball rolling.
One thing, Yatri, can you tell us a little bit about your faith background? I can see you on camera, and our YouTube live streamers can see you as well, but for our podcast listeners.
Absolutely, of course. So I come from a Hindu background. I'm Gujarati. Culturally, India is very, very diverse. So, where you're from, what region you're from really matters a lot, and shows and reflects in the traditions that you adhere to. Trends stick that way. I was the first in my family who's born in the U.S., and I was very grateful growing up with my grandparents. My paternal grandparents lived with us at home, and that's sort of, how I got started on the path, because I would ask questions and I got some answers. They tend to be very practical answers, and that was really appealing. But that's not something that most of us have growing up. And so that sort of laid the groundwork. I had an interest in the practicality of things. I started studying Sanskrit on my own when I was in my middle teens, 14, 15, 16. And then I went to Rutgers. I have a BA in religion. I was originally hoping to go into academia. I actually did a short post back at Columbia too. But the tech world called to me. I work in tech. That's my day job. I find so many actually interesting parallels between the tech world and my religious background. Frameworks are just frameworks, you know. And there's just a lot of thinking in the abstract in both places. But I started doing the religious work just a few years ago. You know, I got married 9 years ago, and I had a great family pundit, and he answered all my questions, and I learned a lot. And my cousin was getting ready to, you know, propose, and he asked, you know, would you do the big Indian wedding again? I said, absolutely. So he started asking questions. I started explaining them, and he said, you know, you should be doing this work. And I kind of laughed. I thought it was a joke, but you know, he wasn't laughing. He said, why not? I said, well, you know, there's a lot of memorization work, and there's a lot of public speaking, and, you know, I'm not really great at those. And he's like, yeah, but the masonry work you've been doing, you definitely are getting better at the public speaking.
And the memorization work.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because I was doing a lot of Masonic ritual at that time as a senior deacon, I think. So, you know, that's sort of how everything kind of fell in line, and I started thinking about it, and it just, I realized for the first time in my life, it was a real calling.
That's awesome. Fah, why don't you help us out? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your faith, your background, and what drew you to becoming a Freemason.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking, my brothers, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to dig into two things I love so much, my spirituality and my Masonic life. I mean, are the two things really any different? There's very little, when you put the two circles together, there's very little that's outside that Venn. My cultural background, my family's from Bangladesh. I practice the Islamic faith. I was born into the Islamic faith. About 4 generations ago, Yatri, my family in Bangladesh was actually 5 generations ago, excuse me, were practicing Hinduism, and then Islam came through, and you know, I just thought it would be an interesting point to share, given all of our backgrounds here and what brought us together. I know this is in the new year, and a few months back for the Feast of Tishri in Scottish Rite, I was just chatting with them. I had the pleasure of talking to them about the Feast of Tishri, which, you know, in the Jewish tradition, we go from the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, which is a festival, to the second festival of Yom Kippur, which is like a time of atonement, and then the Feast of Abundance, the Feast of Tishri. And at that talk, I was chatting about the fact that, because at that point, I had been going to the Scottish Rite for nearly 20 years now, and they remember me running around as a 20-year-old, just beginning to understand the concepts of faith. And I say that to tie into my background. I got to Queens when I was about 4 years old, from Bangladesh. And my mother had me going to the mosque, or the masjid that was around the corner, for all my life on Fridays for service, because Muslims go to service on Fridays. It was in a different language. I couldn't wait to get out. We go through these motions that I had no idea. Not only did I not know what we were doing, the message wasn't being heard. And it was interesting, like, the brand of Islam I was introduced to was a little bit of a fire and brimstone brand, right? Like, I didn't, the God of my understanding now is a God of love, a God of forgiveness, a God of grace. Whereas earlier it was more of a God of fire and brimstone, like, you know, the one who was going to catch me when I was doing the things I wanted to do versus what I should have been doing, which we didn't really have that many conversations about. I say this because at that talk a few months back, I talked about the fact that, spirituality wise, I drank from the fountain of Freemasonry first, before I drank from the fountain of Islam, though I was born into Islam. It wasn't until my early to mid 30s that I dug into the testaments and then the Quran, and started learning about the stories of the prophets, and just putting those pieces together, the framework of that monotheistic archetype of religion, if you will, right? That the majority of human beings today adhere to that Abrahamic concept. Before that, it was just a system of right and wrong, right? So in my early 20s, I got to Masonry when I was about 21 years old. And for the first time, that G, that God, we actually talked about it in a meaningful way for me.
Mm.
In a world where this beautiful religion of mine, this beautiful spiritual aspect that I ascribe to, is being perverted into such horrible things, and in a world where it's so easy to be drinking from the wrong fountain of Islam, I love the fact that it was Masonry that was my balance to it. It allowed me to take those same principles and take the softer, sweeter path. It allowed me to take those same ideals and execute them into real world based on the principles of Masonry, which is how do I make myself better in order to make the world around me better. It's not
Mm.
about me. I'm not the center of the universe. The universe is, love is the center of the universe. My point of existence every day is to figure out how can I add to that love more than I take from it, right?
Mm.
That's that's the most important thing that I think um, affects my journey into this. For a living, I'm a banker. I've been a banker for about 20 some odd years now, particularly in mortgage banking. And so during the day, I'm fueled by competition and a whole different set of um, data and things to look through versus necessarily when that's done, I get to turn on this other part of both my brain and life and purpose. So it's a wonderful dance to be dancing in this role. That's probably a lot more than you bargained for, but that's my 2 cents on my body.
No, that's a great picture. I love it. I love it. All right, Kanjin, take us home. Tell us about you.
Well, I like how Fah was saying about drinking from the fountain of masonry, and what he was saying was actually made me think a lot. That actually, perhaps my first I met masonry before I even met my spiritual path as well. Since I was a child, my family have been many generations within the Masons, and so I was actually raised in a lot of these lodges and had an interesting affinity. I knew from a very young age that I was very interested in masonry, and it connected me with my father and my grandfather, etc. So um, I pretty much knew it wasn't something I wanted. I decided because my father had the requirement that I didn't have any debt besides school debt for me to become a Mason. That was a kind of requirement, I guess, from my family, and that he had to consider me a man responsible enough to become a Mason. So I believe I became a Mason when I was 20. Um, I started my path in the spiritual. I knew I was a Buddhist perhaps from 9 years old when I thought I created my own spiritual path because I thought, everyone has the same capacity. So I don't need to rely on others. I can figure out it for myself, and it's just as relevant as other people. And then when I went to Japan when I was 14 by myself, I met a Buddhist monk, and that's when I realized that the two correlated, and that's how I began my Buddhist journey, and then became a Buddhist monk at the age of 17, and a priest at the age of 21.
Mm.
So therefore, I've been doing that since. My day position is actually I work for the government. I'm now a chaplain, a Buddhist chaplain with the U.S. Navy. Um, and also I work in a hospital as a chaplain. And yeah, through my Masonic journey, my spirituality and Masonry have kind of pretty much grown together because I originally wanted to become a Mason because to understand what it meant to be an American or living in the United States, since we don't perceive to have any traditions.
Mm.
The only tradition I could see that existed um, was Masonry, something that was continued, especially in my family, which made it all the more important for me to connect to that. So I agree that perhaps the first fountain that I drank from was that of Masonry, and that, of course, Masonry had directed me in my spiritual practice as well.
I want to pick up on that. I know I shared questions beforehand and I was like, hey, I got these, pre-prepared questions, but now my head's just exploding with a whole bunch of new ones. And I hope you guys will indulge me a little bit on this one. Because one of the things that was unique in all of your answers was that Freemasonry kind of helped me find my spiritual path, or lit my spiritual path for me to take those steps, which is interesting because that's kind of been the whole intent of the whole structure, whether you're coming in as somebody that practices the Christian faith and goes to church every Sunday, or you practice a different tradition or from a different cultural background, and where you gather for temple or a place of worship happens at a different time or place. The whole idea of Freemasonry is to build that foundation to have the connection to deity, to the supreme architect of the universe. Can we talk a little bit about that? The kind of, if you're looking at your mind as like that lock, and your heart is the key that's unlocking your mind to like make the connections with these spiritual traditions and these views and your belief system, like what was it about Freemasonry that was opening this path to you?
If I can jump in.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that the three of us, and in fact all of us on this call, have in common is a similar age demographic, and that's important because I feel like we're the gatekeepers between the new and old, right? Like I walked into libraries and used library cards and encyclopedias. I
Yeah.
also did the whole running home online and logging on to AOL and
Yep.
right. And so I'm familiar with the new and old, and I see folks like my nephews, right? I've got a 25-year-old nephew, I've got a 21-year-old nephew, I've got a 16-year-old nephew. And I see the amount of information that's at their disposal versus what was coming our way. They have to work just as hard now to fight misinformation as they do good information. And I say that because there's just, life is going at a different pace than it did when I was growing up, it feels like. And the reason why that's important is because to incorporate religion, there's the spirituality, and then there's the dogma of it, the dogmatic everyday piece, right? And then there's the time it takes to actually learn, implement, and live these ideals. And whether it's Freemasonry or any of these other religions, I think the Freemasonry part is important because it acts as a wonderful placeholder, right? If you haven't gotten it all figured out yet, that's okay. Just ascribe to the grand architect. Know that your fellow man also has a right to have his own understanding of how the laws of the universe works, right? All we just want you to do is to know that there is a spirit of the universe, and use that as a placeholder until you figure out what your relationship is with that spirit, and what your purpose is from that spirit. Until then, your brother's got you, and stick to the degrees. They won't guide you wrong. That's my 2 cents.
That's wonderful. It's so interesting because I think I have a slightly different experience because you guys both came in your 20s, early 20s.
Yes, I was 21 years old.
Yeah. And Brother Kanjin, you said as well.
I believe it was 21. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't come in until I was 33-ish. So much later, I guess, in my life. And I had a pretty good foundation in my faith. I was initiated into Vedic study when I was a kid. I just didn't have access to go through the traditional means of memorization and work, and that just felt really difficult. Turns out I have ADHD. I only got the diagnosis like two years ago.
Nice.
Who would have thought? But growing up was very interesting because for me, when I was a kid, my grandmother taught me meditation. So that was my tool. And my way of perceiving the divine was all through primary experience via meditation. And not that I didn't have faith, not that I didn't say prayers, but those were things I did to revere the awe that I felt. I think for me, Masonry taught me that ritual is very, very powerful. Because having become an entered apprentice and going through the memorization work there, I started to realize I see the connections that are in place. Like Hinduism also is somewhat different, I think, because just like Masonry, it kind of gives you everything. It throws all different paths at you and lets you, find something that interests you and run with it. So for a long time for me, that was the philosophical path. And for a little while, I was doing memorization and singing work, or chanting work. And then it just immediately changed to just focusing on ritual. And that's what really prepared me to do the ritual work that I do now. But it was this click of like understanding that these things are the same. The concepts might be abstract, but it's in the standing up and doing. And I felt like, I think you were alluding to, right? It's in that taking the time every day because you decide it's important. And that's what it was for me too. I was like, okay, I need to do this every day. I came up with a pretty rigid daily practice to get me started. And that's really what set me on the path. And that's something I learned from Masonry too. Because like I said, by that time I was senior deacon, and having to go through the ritual, doing degree work and everything, it really changes the way you approach all of it.
It was like an instruction manual for life before I knew I needed one that served as a foundational layer, and then spirituality and what I needed to do to maintain that just added to it.
Very well said.
Yeah, for me, what was interesting was the first time I walked into a lodge and I was like, whoa, I thought you guys said that this wasn't a religion, but there's an altar. And being a New York Mason, there were like 3 volumes of sacred text on my mother lodge's altar. I'm like, there's the biggest Bible I've ever seen in my life. And these 2 other books that I can't read what's on them because it's in a different language, but I'm guessing that it's some, sacred text of some sort, like something important, right? And I'll paraphrase it because it's a part of New York ritual that I love so much in the first degree, where you're at the Bible or you're at the altar and the master says that book that you put your hands on, inside of it is all this. And we all agree that no matter what faith you come from, no matter what branch you come from, that all good men agree on these important principles that can be found within this book, right? Then there's another part specifically that like kind of tapped me on the forehead and was like, wake up. And it's the part where he, again, I'll kind of paraphrase, says like, becoming a Freemason, you are going to have your belief and acceptance challenged. And not in a way that's going to challenge you, like shake you to the core, like, oh my gosh, I question my belief in existence, but I'm going to open my mind to other things that are out there. So I'll toss this out to you, to the 3 of you, and I'm just curious how much exploration you have done. But because of Freemasonry, I have read books on Buddhism, Muslim, have been exposed to the Hindu. My lodge here in DC, we have a Bhagavad Gita that we open. Actually, I wanted to say hi quickly to the secretary of my lodge, Worshipful brother Yatri Trivedi, who I got excited because I'm like, I'm going to be talking to Yatri Trivedi. Are you guys related somehow? He's like, no, it's a very common name. I was like, all right. But I'm sure he's going to enjoy hearing that shout out. But on a serious note, I wanted to know what exploration you have done or what perspective have opened through your eyes now going through this Masonic experience by the help and the aid of your other brothers.
Yeah, to answer the original question that we were having, the word I would think of it is dignity, in the sense that I was taught that Masonry is a place where people are safe to meet of any background, of any mankind, under the specific, standard that we have, which makes it into a safe place. And that's how it was preserved through my family, that this was the only place where before, now we think about how easy it is for religions and people from different cultural backgrounds to get together and to meet. That was not always the case. And Masonry, in a lot of traditions, is seen as that place where we are able to meet. And also, as we were talking about spirituality, to grow. Although I grew up in the mostly Christian area, Christianity to me was actually something that was quite, had a bad, feeling towards, and also a kind of dislike, according to this association, from the people that I have met that purported themselves to be Christian. And even, I would say, even trauma. in that case. But in coming to the Masonic Lodge was the only place that I actually, before, as Fa was saying, before internet and all of that, having a place in which you met people who were practicing of different faiths. And even amongst different faiths, we may lump Christianity or Islam all together, but there are many different schools of thought, different beliefs, different cultural elements, etc. And that through that, I was able to distinguish perhaps what we strive for in our Buddhism, the idea of the authentic self, or that how we are able to spiritually navigate with others. Because in society, usually, as you see, most of the time, those things are taboo. But yet, we have a respectful aspect of it, kind of ground rules or a base, but yet we acknowledge it, which I don't know if in society people would acknowledge it because of all the difficulties that come with it, and perhaps even judgments, because people also don't realize now if you said you were a particular religion, people would judge you. Hence, people changed their last names so that they didn't sound specifically of different traditions, etc. They hid their religion. But that actually, I was taught that Masonry was the only place in which those different faiths and teachings could actually meet peacefully within our society. Now it may not seem so relevant, but actually, I believe it is still relevant because I have brothers from many backgrounds, and even knowing people and being within the how do you say, community with them has even softened them. And this is the amazing part of Masonry, even though we're so old, the ability of Masons to change, which I think is one of the greatest characteristics of man, is that the ability to change. And that is a constant, but yet there are many people who constantly fight against that. And that is something, as we see, even with the three of us coming into existence as Grand Chaplains, that shows the progression of Masonry. Because even though you may say, why in 2026 this hasn't happened before, in most of society it still hasn't happened. So we should acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are the sixth oldest Grand Lodge in the world, and probably higher in rank with respect to setting examples in the world, and certainly our ritual influence and so on. So it may, if it took us a little bit of time to get to the point where this diversity in spirituality within this role in the Grand Lodge was important, I can only imagine where the rest of the world might be. And you asked about, I think, how this has opened us up to the other faiths that aren't necessarily a part of what we ascribe to. Growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, Queens was like the melting pot of the world. I got to, my best friends were Jewish, Christian. I some of my first girlfriends were Christian. I ended up going to Christmas Mass and Easter, and just I got a good amount of exposure to the other religions growing up where I grew up. It wasn't until I went down south when I turned about 19 years old down in Montgomery, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia, where I realized what a blessing it was to have the diversity in New York that we have, because you're forced to learn about all these different cultures and religions and have that tolerance be second nature. Like, I did not know complexion really existed. Like, we talked about it, but I didn't really know it existed until I went down there. And it's not to point any finger, by the way, to
Right.
anyone down south, but I actually became a Mason in the Grand Lodge of Alabama, right? My capital lodge number 923 was my mother lodge in Montgomery, Alabama. And it's just that diversity isn't there. So you're not forced to open up the way you did. Now, coming into this role, I look at it as two main charges: to help brethren with their day-to-day. A brother in my lodge has done a few lectures on the mental health crisis that men are going through today, the crisis of loneliness, and the mental health crisis that generally exists in the population. I talked about being the gatekeepers of information and how information overload is happening. More and more is being put in that I think is of lesser and lesser quality. So it's our jobs first to make sure we have a clear channel between us and the spirit of the sun. and then to be able to put that into, to borrow that line from the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, but then to be able to be channels of peace and bring that to our brothers. That's my first job, right? When I get those notices about brothers passing away, or when I find out that there's a brother who's struggling with things or their family member, to reach out and add that personal touch. That's needed. That's absolutely needed. And that's not just a job of a chaplain, right? That's every brother's job.
Mm.
But that's in particular, we're here for the softer touches that sometimes our other administrators and leaders, um, they only have so much time and attention. There's a lot of work to be done for our infrastructure and for pushing the institution forward. So I think our first job is to be there for one another and make sure we implement that love. Second, going back to us being the sixth oldest Grand Lodge, going back to the fact that we are builders of men. First, we build ourselves, but not so that we can just sit there, right? We build ourselves so that we can be useful to the society around us.
Mm.
And I am particularly blessed to be a American Muslim Mason at a time when we're going through what we go through. Like I mentioned, growing up in Queens and Jackson Heights, which is predominantly now um, Muslim, a good Buddhist population, a good amount of Buddhist population there as well. There's always been a Hindu minority there, and that's also growing. And of course, Jackson Heights was founded on Irish, first German, then Irish, then Italian culture. So those faiths are inherently interwoven. Christianity is inherently interwoven in that, but more and more people who look like me and Yatri are there. So I say that now I live in Westchester County, and I think they say Westchester County is probably one of the biggest concentration or majority Jewish population, right? Like outside of Israel. And we know what the world's been going through the last 2 years. It's that much more important for me um, in this role to be aware of the sensitivities of that particular religion and
Mm.
be a channel, a bridge between those things. So, like for example, when Brother Barayal came into this role, it was amazing because I got to pick his brain and we did a couple of pieces of prayer together at the dedication breakfast that we do, and it was very, very well received. Just a reflection of the fact that the general population of Masonry is looking for that, is looking for examples of unity. And so, and it becomes a greater thing. I think the more and more we do this, like now we're doing a podcast, it's going to get out more. And I think interfaith, unity amongst faith, being bridges of peace, being louder voices about what unifies us versus what divides us, that's very important. And that it's coming from Freemasonry, I think fills my heart with extra joy because that also speaks to the healthiness of our institution. They say not war nor time has stopped Freemasonry, and nor will religious division based on the way we're going. Thank God.
Mm.
Thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah. Yatri, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think both of those points are really, really strong, right? We have a responsibility, and I think also being from a different ethnic background, we sort of have this default state of being the go-to person who knows about our backgrounds. Being in a chaplain role and having that, I think, responsibility, but also ability, since we're constantly learning and trying our practice and everything, to serve as that bridge for communication, to serve, um, to live by Freemasonry's principles by example, right? Um, I think that's really critical. Uh, I don't know so many Hindus who are Masons. Masonry is big in India, but it's really a lot of expats or well-connected brothers compared to the population. And I think part of understanding and sharing this fabric is shared experience. I could talk to brothers in my lodge about what I experienced, but a lot of them wouldn't understand because they come from a different background.
Mm.
We can always compare and contrast, but they're not going to see it from my angle sort of natively, right? So finding brothers, or at least serving as a touch point for brothers in New York who come from the same background or similar backgrounds, right? Perhaps Jain as well, right? Being able to kind of share and facilitate that, and oftentimes sort of translate concepts that exist in other religions for those brothers as well, can help pave that path for clear communication. I think that's something that I find pretty critical. Another aspect I think is also, it's sort of the understanding of how do we talk about this, right? So as an example, in the podcast, you won't necessarily see it, right? But I have a forehead marking that I'm wearing right now. It's white ash from my personal practice. It's interesting because I meet people, and I only started wearing that, a handful of years ago, daily. People see it, they notice it, but they are often hesitant to ask about it. But brothers tend to be a little inquisitive. They do push a little bit, and they'll give you all of the verbal scaffolding, right? I may not know the right term. I'm sorry if I offend you.
The long runway,
I like that, the verbal scaffolding. I like that.
Yeah. But they will ask, and when we talk about it, they come away knowing a little bit more, but they also come away seeing that it's not so strange compared to what they might be used to. And so I think as chaplains, as folks who are in line with that ultimate peace and connection with the divine, that level of patience and understanding, like the exemplification of what we should do as brothers, extend that benefit of the doubt and help folks come up with the right language, not feel upset about, not being able to ask questions, being clear in that way. That facilitation, I think, goes a long way so that we can bridge those gaps.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned, like that part in the first degree at the altar, those boundaries of acceptance, they get expanded to where you feel comfortable because we're like-minded. And I'm coming from a place of love. I'm not coming to attack you and be like, hey, what's the deal? And I'm not going to ask you it that way. I'll be respectfully say, Yatri, can you tell me a little bit more about, boom. And then
every time Yatri goes into a temple with that square and compass on, there's a new group of people who are going to be asking about that square and compass that they otherwise, I was recently in Texas, went down to this big Islamic center in DeSoto, and everywhere I go, I always make sure that I talk about the fact that I'm a Freemason and my particular role, and I often tap into the lodge or the Grand Lodge that's in the jurisdiction I'm going to, and so I get to know some folks there, and I try to build some bridges because Masonry, no matter where we go, can always use new interest, new members, new life, and at the same time, I describe it to the guys in the various mosques, and I go to, like, even the guys in Utica, where our Masonic campus is, the couple mosques that I went to, they're literally 10 minutes apart from each other. And this will be the first year during Ramadan where we get invited, and the brothers from Grand Lodge will hopefully be able to go over to that central masjid in Utica and break some bread together. And so what I describe to the brothers in the mosque or any other place outside of Masonry, I say, you can go to a business and plug into what that business serves, that one or two things that they sell or serve. You can go to a mosque or a temple and plug into that spirituality. When you go to the wall of Freemasonry, there's a cajillion things you can plug into. And so, everyone at Kanjin's temple should feel comfortable to come and plug into that wall of Freemasonry, and everyone at Yatri's temple and everyone at my mosque should be able to, and they haven't been. And we as Masons need that, and certainly our guys should be able to tap into that greater network. I'm sorry if I cut you off, Kenjin. Please jump in.
Oh no, that was just OES people. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying because actually, my temple is in my home lodge. So
Stop it.
yes, so in a very
That's beautiful.
conservative place in Western New York, yeah, my because I'd like to support my temple, I needed a space, and I'd rather give them my rent money than someone else to support the temple. And we rent one of the rooms. Actually, we've had the temple here for almost 2.5 years. So when people come to the temple, they see that it's in a Masonic lodge. So that gives them a few different doors that they have to, or barriers they have to overcome. But that just goes again to show, and I'd like to just point out that the role of chaplain, how significant it is, because I don't think it's been utilized as much as with this Grandmaster Reuben, in the sense that he made this big effort, because I'm sure this is not without its detractors and questioning, etc., of the people who don't know, though I haven't seen that or experienced it. But I think it's really important that the role of the chaplain hasn't been pushed to the side, because a lot of times, like if you look at the lodge, would you like to be chaplain? How about you? Right? And that it didn't really actually serve a purpose. But I like to remind people that in the military, there's only 3 people that can speak to the chief officer. One of them is directly, without going through the chain of command. One of them is the chaplain.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that is possessed a lot of responsibility in that, as Fah was saying, to check in about the wellness of our brothers, and that each of us, that we serve as an example, and that each of us as Masons, as Freemasons, do the same, and that we are the example, that we send cards to brothers, but not only that, calling and caring, and as was stated about, for instance, the inquisitive nature of brothers about certain things, I find that to be, as we were talking about before, a safe place, that they don't have to feel like they're ignorant. They can go ahead and ask those questions without fear, and that they actually get the opportunity, because as diverse as this world thinks it is still very secluded in many ways. And people, the more you get out from the cities, the more insular people are, and they don't have the opportunity to meet somebody of a different faith. We take that for granted if you've ever lived in a big city, right? Or if you've actually had the opportunity to travel. Those are still very, as mind-blowing as it is, that is still very much a luxury. And that we as chaplains should be able to bring back or share that information with our brothers, making them stronger. Because even we talk about how much information there is out, and Fah talked about the quality of information. Firsthand information is the best, because again, you can't believe everything you find on the internet. It doesn't mean it's true. And I think that allows us a certain level of intelligence and benefit in our diversity. And as our diversity grows and our lodges grow, I think that is the best place for us to grow as human beings, rather than, as we're seeing now, just tons of information. A lot of it, of course, being one-sided, politically motivated, etc. Instead of actually having the opportunity in our lives, and as Yatri was saying about learning through meditation, through experiential understanding, is the only way that I believe we can learn with deep wisdom, to have that experience. And I think that that's where the interaction that we have, especially the demonstrative example as the chaplains, I think that that's why this has become a very important role now. And I think that this is something that maybe like our society in the 70s, we see how our ritual was changed, or how certain institutions, or as we call landmarks, where even though we're not supposed to remove landmarks, people have changed it to kind of accommodate for whatever the changing fad is. But that we always come back to this baseline of humanity, which is in our traditions and our ritual, etc. So I think that as protectors of that, chaplains are an essential part of it. So I think that should be stated. This is perhaps something of a new life in an aspect of masonry that had been for a long time, because as we could see in our society, kind of pushed to the side or even perhaps forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you make that point, Kanjin, because it's right along with Fa made a comment about how we should all act as chaplains to our fellow brothers, right? And to your point, I mean, just looking at the screen when you mentioned like who do we normally put in the chaplain's chair, we all kind of like look down, and it is that. Unfortunately, I know in my home jurisdiction in the old 17th Albany area, the tradition is that the past master sits in the chaplain's chair, not because he's a man of faith, not because he can quote you, chapter and verse, but literally because he's the closest person physically to the master. So if there's a question during the meeting, he can be there as like a bench coach. And I hate to put it that way, but that's how it's based. And so to your point, I feel like we have literally pushed this important position aside. Now, I was at the Grand Lodge session in May. I knew that Kanjin had already been appointed with his commission to write Worshipful, because I got that information literally like days before we recorded your podcast episode in 2025, early 2025 here for Craftsman Online. But when I heard that Yatri and Fah had also been appointed, I was like, yes, it's about GDMF and time that we've done these things, right? And that's what I love about our Grand Master. So I want to put the question back on you, because you've talked about this need to expand, get back to the roots, redefine this role. You are 3 grand chaplains with that purple apron, with the right worshipful title, with the ability to make transformative change. What are some things that you're looking at doing during your time in serving the Grand Lodge? What is some light that you want to be bringing to our craft?
Thank you for shouting out the current Grand Master. I think it's worth saying that I feel an extreme amount of gratitude for Most Worshipful Kessler for getting the ball started with this particular piece with Grandmaster Rubin when he appointed me a few years ago, and then continuing on with getting the diversity since Grandmaster Rubin's taken the helm with what he's done. I think it's amazing. And then, just to build a little bit earlier on that answer and what we've done and what we're hoping to do, I also want to say a big shout out to Right Worshipful Stenrick Adams, our unofficial captain of the chaplains. He's been an amazing guiding light, and Stenrick's really set the stage for me as far as what that role is on a in terms of importance, like Kenjin was pointing out earlier. My mentor, Michael Reichman, he's not a brother, but he should be. He often points out to me, he goes, there's a reason why sayings don't go away. It's not just cheesy things that we throw out there to like drive you guys crazy. There's real value. Think about why certain sayings that have been around for years and years and years, hundreds of years, don't go away. And of course, I can't think of a single cheesy saying right now, but it'll come to me. But I say that to make a parallel with the fact that why hasn't the role of chaplain gone away? Society has vacillated towards its relationship with secularism and not this institution has kept the chaplain role as a landmark of the figures that need to run a lodge, of the roles that need to be involved in a Grand Lodge. Kenjin, you mentioned the fact that a chaplain still has the ability to go to the top of the house, the top of command, without any barriers. People who lead are supposed to be able to get guidance to lead within the framework of what the Grand Architect wants us to do. And we human beings, right, we're inherently flawed according to my lay of the land. We're inherently flawed in that we're not going to remember every tool that's in our tool belt every single day. In my walk of life, I'm taught to go and pray 5 times a day, at least to check in with God multiple times and to remember the principles I need as the problems are coming up on a day-to-day basis, because I can't remember everything at once. So then going back to this question of what we're doing, I think the chaplain role exists because we still have to not just deliver that wellness, but that message to our brethren on a daily basis, and to our leadership when tough decisions have to be made. I think that we as a Grand Lodge need to really, really focus on the wellness aspect. I know there's a couple brothers like Right Worshipful Weisberg, another chaplain up in northern New York. Our goal is to, and I think Yatri, you mentioned you're excited about this as well, is to kick off some kind of program where brothers who are in recovery are able to get together and talk about their recovery experience and how it works with their Masonic life and how they integrate the Masonic principles with their recovery principles, but not just for the ones that are in it, but for the ones that are struggling around us. Because there's not one time do I mention to a brother that, for example, I don't drink, and it's not because of the Islamic faith. In the Islamic faith, you also don't drink, but it's because, in particular, I'm also in recovery, and I don't drink. I ascribe to a program of recovery to make sure that that's a type of medicine that I take on a regular basis for my wellness. And I mentioned this in a meeting, and I mentioned this hanging out with brothers. Just about never, there's always someone that they want me to reach out to, or a story of how someone needed help. I think Brother Weisberg mentioned last summer that just in the first 2 quarters, there were over a dozen brothers in upstate New York that reached out to him, that they needed to help get into some kind of program. So
Mm.
that's a big goal of mine to start implementing, to figure out how can we get that level of wellness a little bit more granular and into the hands of everyone that needs it. That's my particular goal on the chaplain side. I know the Grand Master also wants us to start putting out the chaplain's corner, so hopefully we'll start doing on a weekly basis a message from the chaplains. But I'll leave it at that and let you two jump in, brothers.
Yeah, I think that's a big part. I did agree. I think that's an integral thing that we need to provide. I think you're right that chaplains, particularly, I think you used the phrase the softer aspects, right? Like that's a really big aspect because of that understanding that we lend before it's even asked for to brothers who are looking for things. Um, I don't know. I maybe it's my religious background, but I'm going to use the E word here. The esoteric elements that exist in Masonry. I know there's, I hear of people who really don't like that word. I've yet to meet one. And I look at brothers who are newer and coming in, and they're looking for it, and they're not necessarily finding it. And they're not getting a good education on what it means. And most worshipfuls put together the Academy Esoterica, which is a great resource. There's some elements of traditional observance that are available. But it comes down to daily practice. And I think it helps to have someone who, because as chaplains, we all have our faith, but we are all exploring and talking and, about each other's faiths, because it helps us understand our own better, and connect better, not just with each other, but with the divine. And so that puts us in this unique space where we can extend that to brothers, not just at the lodge level, but beyond. Sometimes you just need to hear something a specific way at a specific time, a specific cadence, under the specific phase of the moon to understand it, right? That's one aspect of it. We were talking a little bit about chaplains in the lodge, and I find it interesting because for me, going from master of the lodge and then becoming past master and immediately moving to chaplain makes perfect sense esoterically. I think part of the thing that we're all missing is that we need to stop, take a second to breathe, and be intentional with what we're doing. And I think that's another thing that we as chaplains often have, is that ability to just hit the pause button on what's going on. Not just check in, but provide those subtle reminders of what we need, because we're all bad at it, us included, right? the ability to kind of jump in and provide that general advice for the moment, I think does a lot. And I think inculcating that as a habit also does a lot. In society, I think we see people just writing each other off, whereas Masons, we're not supposed to do that. And as Masons, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. So we have to exemplify that. And that helps us sort of get there. Now, we're not perfect at it, but it does give us something to aspire to. And just serving as a reminder of why we're all here. Our rituals, what keeps us Masons. That's what's unique to us. Calling back to like the basic passages that we've all memorized and reminding us that, hey, you have to get your priorities in order. That's really important, whatever else is going on. And serving as that sort of barrier of confidentiality as well, right? I think shame is a big factor in general. In society, we don't forgive easily. And as men, we tend not to wear shame well. We tend to retreat and hide, and I think that's an element that, at least we've talked about in my Mother Lodge. A lot of the brothers have very interesting and diverse thoughts on that, but talking about it gets us an idea of how we need to progress. And it makes us more forgiving when we realize that our brothers are willing to forgive once we've, admitted whatever it is we've done. And we don't have to linger on those negative feelings. We can course correct and move on. Exemplifying that for society is also a big part of it. Like Fah, you said, also, we are bridges to our own communities from Masonry, as well as bridges from our communities to Masonry. So,
yeah, with the extremism and division growing in the world, Masonry is for sure a sobering voice and perhaps a good example we should be in what we're contributing. That's why I believe absolutely those aspects of self-care, care of other emotions, etc., as we grow as men and as humans is something. Where else is that offered? And where else can that be demonstrated? We don't have many opportunities in this world. Everything is pretty much manufactured. And we do that to ourselves. We separate and isolate ourselves because of that shame and fear. I think fear is another aspect as well,
good call.
especially fear of the other. That's growing every day. And it's so strange as a person of the 80s and 90s, kid of that, it's very strange to feel like we're going backwards sometimes. But yet having this example, living example that's, of course, spanned through decades. We're very blessed to have that. And what we are doing and what I'm doing as well, and we can see what we also bring to Masonry are kind of benefits as well we can share with others. So one of the other programs with other chaplains who are professional chaplains who have the educational background, the Grand Master Ruben is big on education as well. So another aspect that we are all contributing from our lives in the education that I've had to go through, and a few of the other clergy as well, in understanding what it means to be a chaplain. We hope to also bring that educational aspect to it, to help support, as you're saying, all the efforts that we have perhaps with support groups and how Masonry is growing. Because again, if we, that sensitivity, that awareness is something, as we can see in our spiritual faiths, is something that is learned through demonstration, through experience. And that each Mason, especially in each of the roles that we take or that we enter into, is a way of bringing that light to others. So that's one aspect that I've been encouraged of. And there's a few other brothers who have Master of Divinity degrees. And so that brothers don't have to go through 3 years of school we can bring hopefully some of that opportunity to our brothers as education to help support. And then we have brothers who have the experience in the perhaps addiction aspects of it, cultural aspects, etc., that we together as a team. And I believe that that's what has been manifesting it. It was manifested. We can't take for granted that this was through a lot of hard work. And also I have to appreciate Fah, because I remember meeting you at the Grand, where we, Utica campus. That was the first time meeting when I had spoken to the Grand Master, and his ears are always open at least. And he said, "Oh, you're becoming a chaplain in the Navy. Well, what tradition? Buddhism. Oh, that's great. We need a Buddhist Grand Chaplain." And then I had never met Fah before. And to me, it was like, well, now I'm suddenly being put into this position of Grand Lodge. But how awesome is that? And the connections that we were able to make. And I also have to say one thing, the positivity towards change is something that Masonry has grown in ourselves. And I have to make that shout out. In the time that I've been a Mason, we've been going towards the light rather than the darkness. And I just have to acknowledge that, because that's something, again, society and that seems to be going to a very dark place. And it's nice that we're kind of in the midst of all that, going and bringing and keeping the light. Because again, most appreciate also your podcast, because before it would have just been the voices within our lodges, and these experiences would have been just regionally, where they were like, oh, there's a Buddhist chaplain or out in Western New York, and then we have an Islamic chaplain in.
It would have just been a myth.
We probably would have been the myth. Yes, they're like, no, I don't believe that. But when we show up in Grand Lodge, and also another important aspect is that with change, such as old organizations usually don't change. But I'd like to say that I had talked to the Fah about this and seen my apron actually to acknowledge my faith group. Instead of the Holy Bible, it says the Lotus Sutra, which is my book of sacred law, and that is on my apron. As a Mason, I respected our tradition that, I'd like to keep our tradition how it is, but yet be able to express myself, express my light in Masonry as well. And that was accepted and supported without any difficulty. So I just have to say it's phenomenal.
And one of my favorite things is the battle I have within, because I do have to get a new apron, because the first apron that I got just doesn't fit me. And so the new one, I'm told, this is what Kanjin did, Fah. You got to get the Holy Quran instead of the Holy Bible, which like, I get it. It makes sense. But there's something that I love about the way, the fact that it does say Holy Bible. And like, I was in Italy wearing this and doing the chaplain's piece and carrying the message with some of the brothers, and the Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master, Grand Lodge Italy showed up, and it's very interesting. I get a lot of interesting reactions. Sometimes it takes a second for people to, I don't want to say swallow that pill, because that sounds uncomfortable.
They got to process.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
And the fact that it says Holy Bible on it, look at me, ask me my religion, and I'll speak about the fact that no, it's yes, I'm Muslim, but like at the end of the day, the Old Testament goes to the New Testament, and kind of, if you look at it from a purely historical perspective, take the personal thing out of it and just look at it like it's a story being told. It's literally part 3 of the part 1 and 2 that the Testaments bring to the table, right? It serves as a nice icebreaker, and so I don't know, Kanjin. I don't know if I'm gonna get the one that says Holy Quran. I probably will get it for having it, because I don't think there's any other Muslim chaplain right now or on deck that's gonna be getting it. But I do like the Holy Bible one. I'm probably gonna sport that from time to time as well, because I just love the way it helps be a lubricant to the conversations.
I agree with you on that.
But how beautiful is it that I get to have that dilemma? Excuse me, my
Yeah.
sometimes I just realize, and we have to acknowledge being first generation something. I think that's an important aspect to bring in as well. That we
Thank you
are.
for that reminder. Thank you.
Yeah.
I needed to hear that. Thank you.
That's why sometimes, some things need to be stated more obvious than others. So that I take that into account as a challenge for myself. Yeah.
Yatri, you gonna rock the Gita?
I didn't know that was an option, to be honest. Now I'm thinking about it, and
I can just see him now Google searching.
Yeah.
I'm also pretty atypical. I do the religious work for folks, usually weddings and baby related rituals. But Hinduism sort of set up differently, so we don't really sermonize the same way. Although clients do like that and want that often, so the education is part of it. And for me personally, I am very eclectic with where I draw my inspiration from. So I might pick a book that probably brothers have never heard of or are not familiar with, and that might be a better way to go as a more interesting talking point. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot there. There's a lot for me to think about.
But it's also what kind of makes it cool and a great way to kind of sum up this conversation, that it's like different backgrounds, different beliefs. You have the choice. You can make it your own. And just kind of the quick takeaways that I have from our conversation is I'm never going to look at the chaplain's chair ever the same way again. I love the idea that we should all be embracing and being a chaplain as brother Masons in our lives. I also like the comment that was made of being the bridge to the community and the community coming back to the lodge, that should never end. And again, Kanjin made a great point. Like, we are here at the beginning of a new year, at least by the time when this episode airs. I'll give it away. If you can hear crickets chirping in the background, it's because we're recording this towards the end of October in 2025, right? Someone's got the windows open because trick-or-treaters will be here in a few days. And the weather's nice. We wouldn't be doing this in January. But to the point of is that people look to your chair because your office represents light and also the faith that we have, which really kind of exemplifies the other pillars of Freemasonry: brotherly love, relief, and truth, right? And those are those are the values that we're supposed to be living every day. But the one thing that you bring as chaplains that I've taken from this conversation is hope. And this is a larger question that we have, not just at the beginning of a new year, but also just at where we are. As we've talked about generationally, we're all about the same age, just good looking guys. Where do you find the hope for Freemasonry and the future for new Masons coming into our fraternity? How far can you see out that way? What is your vision of Freemasonry in the future?
That's a deep question. What I notice from brothers who are coming in now and what they're asking for, ones who are younger as Masons, right? Any age, but just new to Masonry, as well as brothers who are actually just younger in age. I have a feeling that the craft is going to change a lot in the next, I don't know, say 50 years. Because we're starting to see people coming back who are looking for things that, were more in fashion before, but with the wealth of information that's available, they're looking at it very differently. They're approaching it from a different speed. We have brothers coming in who are talking about the landmarks and what they mean and how they can be interpreted to be universal in a variety of ways. And I don't know that they'll change, but the conversation's interesting to see, versus brothers who have been around for a long time who don't even entertain the notion. The talking is important, I think, to better understand. Yeah.
Kenton, thoughts?
I think that it's going to change with not only the mentality but the diversity of the way society looks now. Masonry has been something that, and in many ways, has been taken for granted by many of the people who have been entitled or had the opportunity to join it. But I see that changing, in that as even with this option, that as we're talking about people as Buddhists going, oh, I can be a Mason, or from Hindu tradition or Islam. It's surprising to a lot of people. And then once those doors are open, because right now, what people are relying on is the people who have always supported Masonry. But yet I see that changing. And then also, as Yatri was saying, the form of that's going to change. I see more of it going towards contemplative lodges. That's something out of all the events that I did throughout the year. We have our parties and our table lodges. That was something where brothers actually connected on an amazing level beyond the kind of superficial showing up at a meeting, paying bills, which is a lot of where Masonry was residing. Hence, people stepped away from it. But yet, a spirituality that's a place that's different from churches and from other spiritual places that are specific, in the sense that we can all come together and have a experience to lessen our fear, lessen our anxiety, really come to terms as men, to not live in quiet desperation or sadness, which a lot of men do. That we're finding out there's a lot of brothers and people who are in need of our just caring, and we have that in Masonry. So I see that changing, as Yatri was saying, in the future for sure, from something as a structural organization to something more of what we're in tune with, and something that's reaching out to people, whether it's a recovery group under the principles of Masonry, or it's as we call the Lodge of Contemplation, in which brothers actually share their feelings and are okay with that. It's been interesting because we're dealing with different generations, and yet I see the older generation be okay with that when it's presented to them in a respectful and dignified way, in which it preserves our landmarks, which makes us Masonry. Not to remove those, but to within those that safety place, which those are places in which we are safe. Our lodges to through our ritual and also through our community, to really better people. I think that's where it's going, because otherwise the other model is something that's so disconnected from modern thought that people don't have space for it. They have space for, of course, as we can see, self-reflection and finding answers and finding community and finding meaning that's not in a 2-second clip or in a emotionally removed interaction, like how's the weather? The weather's good, but something deeper than that.
I like that you referenced, very subtly, that knowing how to present the idea matters a lot. If you talk to anybody in my mother lodge, they will tell you, I always just say, read the book. Because if you memorize the beautiful parts of it, on a whim, you can call up what the ritual tells you in very plain language, in a way that nobody can resist or oppose. And I think it works. And you can do that while showing off some diversity. I wanted to call out, we started the session with a prayer, and it was wonderful to hear you give a prayer that was also in line with, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? It's the same cadence. It's wonderful, and it still gets to the heart of what we're trying to do, and yet it gets us thinking about the approach slightly differently, That's like the perfect exemplification of this.
Thank you. And it's so funny. I we come from different cultures and spiritual backgrounds, and then they decided to stick like a corporate guy in here, because you hear like my focus was on process and execution of the roles and duties, right? And what am learning about. And then how many times you heard the word esoteric come out of Yachi's mouth today, and with respect to his focus, right, versus 0 times for mine. And I love that because I also look at this and masonry almost from like what are our key performance indicators? What are our KPIs? What is the product that we're delivering? What is the service masonry provides? And in a nutshell, for me, masonry sells a quality of life. It sells you a better quality of life by giving you the access to the ritual book to give you a certain instruction manual of that moral compass that you need to make sure you're not outside of that circle. It gives you brothers, right? Because we human beings, we can't just decide that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be a great guy, or I'm going to be, you know, just the perfect example of what I need to be. We struggle, we fall, we're fallible. We were inherently made to be to make mistakes. So we have guys around us, our brothers, to help us figure out like, hey, I didn't live out this ideal when faced with adversity. Instead, I didn't apply these principles, and here's where I fell short. What did you do the last time? Right. So if we're talking about delivering the quality of life, we have the book, we have the people around us, we have that wall that I mentioned earlier, where depending on the industry you come from, what your interest might be, whether it's industry or making a difference in the world, whether it's working on yourselves within the community or from a global perspective, whether it's traveling as a Mason and getting to have the entire globe basically put into the palm of your hands, because now you've got family everywhere you go. And I've actually had the pleasure of living that. I 2.5 years ago got my citizenship, and I've been to a little over a dozen countries now as a Mason, and it's been an amazing experience. So whether it's that aspect, whatever it is, we are now selling, or we have been, and in particular need to make sure that we know we're selling a quality of life here. And our audience needed to get broader because we're struggling for membership. And so, we weren't reaching deep into the necessarily Buddhist cultures that are all around us in certain cities, or the Hindu culture or the Muslim culture, which tends to just have a little bit more prevalency now. But these are the segments of society that masonry's light needs to go into, both because society needs it. Right? We more than once talked about the fact that society's in turmoil, and we need the light of masonry to penetrate every point of darkness that it can. Society needs us, but we also need to pay bills, and we need members. And so this is a great way to be able to, what does the future hold? Hopefully these campaigns of wellness, campaigns of diversity, campaigns of unity on a grand level, with the day-to-day things we all do, by going to lodge, by being the versions of our blue book, being the versions of our degrees in everyday life, right? Walking as upright men and Masons. Hopefully that attracts people and keeps people, and together we can start being that background that we once were in that fabric of society that held it all together. Because I think, Masonry does great. I joined in the like 2006, 2007. So I went through, especially in New York, this really big struggle where all we talked about for a little while was like, how do we stop the bleeding with membership? To now having I won't say turn that tide and jinx ourselves, right? But we are now, from a statistical perspective, in a much better place than we've been in maybe 2 decades. Now we're not so much talking about that. Now we're talking about how do we build on that foundation. And I hope in the next 5 to 10 years, that's the direction that we grow. If we can keep working on our product and making sure that we're able to deliver it in the places that's needed, I think Masonry's got nowhere to go but up.
Nice.
I,
Leave
I
that there.
literally just wrote down quality of life. It sums it up so nicely, Fa. It's masonry. It provides a quality of life that is just, it's wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you guys for letting me share that.
And thank you, all three of you. Right Worshipful Fah, Right Worshipful Yatri, Right Worshipful Kanjin. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. I say this with every guest, like I was looking forward to this episode, but this is one that I would put a gold star next to for anybody who's had an interest in Freemasonry and go, if you think you know what Freemasonry is about, listen to this episode. It's going to blow your mind. So thank you, brothers, for coming on.
30 last seconds as we go out. If you two want to go first, please, by all means, I'll end it with the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi.
I'm
I think
good.
that's a great way to do it. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. And I hope everyone got to learn something a little different.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. With that, we'll do a moment of silence for those who are out there in need of our light. And we'll end it with, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, harmony. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Thank you, my brothers. Thank you, Brother Michael Arce. Thank you, Craftsman Online.